A white van, a quiet street, a woman who almost kept walking. What she did next saved four lives. Every single day, millions of people walk past things they don't understand, think that feel slightly wrong, think that makes them pause for just a second before they tell themselves it's nothing, keep moving and forget about it by lunchtime. Maya Chen almost did the same. Almost. This is a story of one ordinary morning, one quiet decision, and the four children who are alive today because of it.
The van had been parked there for 3 hours. Most people walked past it without a second glance. It was white, ordinary, the kind of vehicle that blends into any street in any city. But Maya noticed it the moment she turned onto the cobblestone path near the palace gates. Something was wrong. She didn't know what exactly. She couldn't explain it with logic or reason. It was a feeling, the kind that starts low in your stomach and slowly climbs into your chest. The kind your body sends when your mind hasn't caught up yet. Maya pulled her coat tighter and kept walking. She was late for work. She was always late. She told herself it was nothing. Just a van. Just a Tuesday morning. But she slowed down anyway. Maya Chen was 29 years old. She worked as a florist 2 streets away from the east gate of Buckingham Palace. Every morning, she walked this same route. She knew the rhythm of this street, the way a musician knows a song, every beat, every pause, every sound that didn't belong. And this van didn't belong. The engine wasn't running. There were no markings on the side, no company logo, no license plate number she could read from where she stood. The windows were completely dark, not just tinted, covered from the inside. She stopped walking. If you've ever felt that a story like this deserved to be told, the kind of moment where one ordinary person changes everything, then you're in the right place. Stay with us. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell so you never miss one. Every week, we bring you moments that remind you how powerful one person can be. Maya stood on the pavement and stared at the van. Her breath made small clouds in the cold morning air. She looked around. People were walking past. A man in a gray suit, a woman pushing a stroller, 2 tourists taking photos of the palace gates in the distance. Nobody else seemed to notice. The royal guard at the east gate stood with perfect stillness. Red coat, black hat, his eyes forward, his posture rigid. He had been there every morning for as long as Maya had been walking this route. She had never spoken to him. Not once. You didn't just walk up to a royal guard and start a conversation, but her feet were already moving toward him. Her heart was hammering. She felt ridiculous. She imagined him looking at her the way people look at someone who has clearly lost their mind. She imagined walking away embarrassed, telling herself later that it was just a van, just a coincidence, just her anxiety playing tricks. She kept walking toward him anyway. His name, she would later learn, was Officer Daniel Marsh. He had served in the King's Guard for 11 years. He had stood at that gate through rain and wind and protest marches and tourist season. He had seen everything. But when the young woman in the green coat walked up to him with wide, serious eyes and quietly said, "I think something is wrong with that van," he felt it too. He looked where she was pointing. The van sat perfectly still. Not a sound, not a movement. The morning traffic moved around it like water around a stone. "How long has it been there?" he asked. His voice was low and controlled. "At least 3 hours," she said. "Maybe longer. I saw it when I came for my early delivery at 6. It was now past 9. Daniel Marsh had protocols for everything. He had been trained for scenarios most people never imagined. But training and reality are two different things. Training happens in rooms with fluorescent lights and instructors with clipboards. Reality happens on cold Tuesday mornings when a florist points at a white van and your gut tells you she's right. He reached for his radio. And in that moment, the moment his fingers touched the device on his shoulder, the van's engine clicked. Just once. A single, quiet click. Like something waking up. Daniel's hand froze on the radio 1 second. 2. He kept his eyes on the van. His body hadn't moved, but something inside him had shifted, that invisible gear that every trained officer eventually learns to feel. The gear that moves from routine to alert without making a sound. Maya was still standing beside him. She hadn't run. He noticed that. Most civilians, when they sense real danger, take a step back. They distance themselves from whatever frightens them. Maya hadn't moved an inch. She was scared. He could see that in the way she was gripping her bag strap, but she was still there. "Step behind me," he said quietly. She did. He pressed the radio. Spoke in short, clipped phrases. Code words she didn't understand. Numbers and letters strung together like a private language. His tone was calm, almost bored, as if he were reporting something minor, a tourist who had lost their hat, a cyclist on the wrong side of the road. But his eyes never left the van. The response came back in seconds. More codes, a pause, then a voice sharper than the first, asking for a visual confirmation. Daniel gave it. Another pause, longer this time. Maya counted her own heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. She wondered if she had made a mistake. She wondered if she had just caused an enormous amount of trouble over a vehicle belonging to a plumber or a painter who had parked there while working on a nearby building. She thought about the embarrassment, the questions, the paperwork. She thought about the click. That single engine click had done something to her. It had landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples hadn't stopped yet. Is there anyone inside? She whispered. I don't know, Daniel said. Within 4 minutes, everything changed. 2 unmarked cars appeared at opposite ends of the street. They moved without urgency, slowly, deliberately, the way sharks move when they have already decided where they are going. Men in plain clothes stepped out. They carried nothing visible in their hands, but their posture said everything. Then 2 more police vehicles turned onto the street from the north. No sirens, no flashing lights. The absence of noise made it more frightening, not less. A quiet operation is a serious operation. Maya understood that instinctively. The tourists with cameras had stopped taking photos. The man in the gray suit had stopped walking. Without any announcement, without any instruction, the street was slowly emptying. People sensed it the way animals sense a change in weather. Something invisible in the air that told them to move away. A woman in a black jacket approached Daniel. She flashed an ID badge so quickly Maya barely saw it. They exchanged a few words. The woman glanced at Maya. You reported it, she asked. Yes, Maya said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. How long have you been walking this route? 2 years, every weekday. The woman nodded slowly, as if this were a very important detail. And you've never seen this vehicle before? Never. Another nod. The woman turned back to Daniel and they continued talking in low voices. Maya felt suddenly like a person who had knocked on a door and, when it opened, realized the house was much bigger and darker than it looked from outside. She should have left. There was nothing stopping her. She wasn't being detained. She wasn't under any obligation to stay, but she stayed. She watched as 2 officers in heavy protective gear approached the van from angles careful, measured, each step deliberate. One of them held a small device she didn't recognize. He moved it slowly along the side panel of the van, just below the window. He stopped. He said something into his earpiece. The street went very still. The woman in the black jacket turned back to Maya. Her expression hadn't changed, but something behind her eyes had, something careful and controlled. Mister, she said, we're going to need you to move back further, much further. And for the first time since she had noticed the van that morning, Maya Chen felt truly afraid. They moved her to the far end of the street. A junior officer with kind eyes and a nervous habit of touching his earpiece every few seconds guided her gently but firmly past a temporary barrier that had appeared seemingly from nowhere. Blue and white tape. A handful of officers forming a loose human wall between the public and the van. What's happening? Someone beside her asked. Maya turned. A young man, a tourist, maybe, backpack on, camera around his neck. Eyes wide with the confused excitement of someone who had stumbled into something they didn't understand. I don't know, she said. She did know, though, not the facts, not the details. But she knew in the way that the body knows things before the mind admits them. She knew it was serious. She knew that the officers moving around that van were not doing so out of caution. They were doing so out of certainty. Something was in there. The woman in the black jacket. Maya had heard another officer call her Hargreaves was standing at the center of it all. She moved between groups of people, always calm, always deliberate. She reminded Maya of a conductor. Every gesture seemed to direct something. 30 minutes passed. Then 40, a bomb disposal unit arrived. There was no mistaking them. The heavy vehicle, the reinforced suits, the equipment that looked like it belonged in a film, except that films never quite captured the weight of it. The way the men moved in those suits, slowly, methodically. The way you move when there is no margin for error. The tourist beside Maya had stopped speaking. Several people around her had their hands pressed over their mouths. A woman a few feet away was quietly crying, not out of grief, out of something that had no word. That particular kind of overwhelm when reality suddenly exceeds everything you were prepared for. Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket. Her boss. 3 missed calls. A message, where are you? The morning orders won't prepare themselves. She almost laughed. She did in single quotes. She thought about the flowers waiting for her at the shop. White roses for a wedding, yellow tulips for a birthday delivery. She thought about how she had almost not noticed the van. She had almost been too distracted, too tired, too late and too rushed to let herself feel what she felt. She thought about all the mornings she had walked that route without truly seeing it. An officer approached the barrier near her. He was older, silver-haired, wearing a suit rather than a uniform. He carried himself with the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades making critical decisions in difficult moments. He stopped beside her. You're the one who reported it, he asked. Yes. He looked at her for a moment, not the way officials sometimes look at you, scanning, assessing, categorizing, but directly, the way a person looks at another person. Good instinct, he said simply. Before she could respond, a sound came from the direction of the van. Not an explosion, not a crash. A sound she hadn't expected at all, a voice low and muffled, filtering through the sealed panels of the vehicle. A human voice, more than one. The crowd behind the barrier heard it too, a collective inhale, a shift. people leaning forward unconsciously as if 2 more inches would help them hear. The disposal team stopped moving. Hargreaves pressed her earpiece and spoke rapidly. 2 officers moved toward the rear doors of the van, not in the heavy gear, but carefully, hands raised slightly, the body language of people trained to approach unpredictability. The rear doors opened. Maya stood on her toes. Though she was too far away to see anything clearly, she could see the officers leaning in. She could see the back of Hargreaves' head, completely still. She could see the silver-haired man beside her, straighten almost imperceptibly. Then one of the officers at the van turned around. His face, even from that distance, told her everything had changed. He wasn't reaching for a weapon. He wasn't calling for backup. He was calling for medical support. And the word that moved through the crowd, whispered from person to person like a slow wave, was the last word anyone had expected to hear. Children. If this story is already gripping you, if you feel that pull in your chest, share it with someone right now. One tap, that's all it takes. Let's get back to Maya. For children. That was the number that would be in the news reports by evening. That was the number that would make people stop scrolling on their phones and read the whole article. That was the number that would wake people up the next morning and stay with them over breakfast. For children between the ages of 6 and 11, found inside a sealed white van on a Tuesday morning, 3 hours after they had been put there. But standing behind that barrier, Maya didn't know the number yet. She didn't know the ages. She didn't know their names or where they came from or who had done this to them. She only knew what she could see. Small figures, wrapped in emergency foil blankets, the kind that crinkled with every movement, silver and fragile, being carried or guided carefully out of the van by officers who were moving with an urgency that was different from before. Before, the urgency had been sharp and defensive. Now it was something else. Tender. That was the only word for it. Large men in tactical gear being tender, moving slowly so as not to frighten, speaking in voices too low for Maya to hear, but she could see the effect. One of the children, a small girl with tangled dark hair, had her face turned toward an officer's shoulder, not pulling away, leaning in. The ambulances had already been there, idling quietly at the far end of the street. Now the paramedics moved with purpose. Stretchers, blankets, a child's small hand reaching out, and being held immediately by a gloved hand reaching back. Maya realized she was crying. She hadn't decided to. It simply happened the way weather happens. One moment her eyes were dry, and the next there were tears on her face. And she didn't know exactly when they had started. The woman beside her, a stranger, middle-aged with a shopping bag over her arm, reached over and briefly, silently, held Maya's hand, just for a few seconds, then let go. They didn't look at each other. They didn't speak. Some moments don't need words. By now, the street had been fully closed. The trickle of morning pedestrians had become a frozen crowd behind extended barriers. Police radios crackled constantly. A helicopter moved overhead, low and deliberate. Hargreaves appeared at Maya's side. She looked different now. Not harder, but more human somehow. Like the controlled surface of her had shifted just slightly. "We're going to need a formal statement," she said. "When you're ready, are they okay?" Maya asked. Her voice cracked on the last word. She didn't try to hide it. Hargreaves paused. In her world, pauses meant something. This one was not the pause of someone who didn't know. It was the pause of someone deciding how much truth to give. "They will be," she said, "because of this morning." Those 4 words hit Maya in the chest with the force of something much larger than their size. Because of this morning. Because of a green coat and cold air and a feeling in her stomach that refused to be ignored. She thought about the moment she had almost kept walking. She had almost told herself she was being paranoid. She had almost been too tired, too late, too small, to make the kind of decision that felt like it belonged to other people. Braver people. More important people. She was a florist. She arranged flowers for weddings and birthdays and apologies and grief. She was not a hero. She had never thought of herself as a hero, but for children were breathing fresh air right now instead of recycled air in a sealed metal box, and that was not nothing. Daniel Marsh appeared beside Hargreaves. He looked at Maya with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life. Not admiration exactly. Something quieter and more real than admiration. "You didn't have to come to me," he said. "Most people don't." "I know," she said. "Why did you?" She thought about it. She thought about the van, the click, the covered windows. She thought about every morning she had walked that street and the way this morning it felt different from the very first step. "It just didn't feel right," she said. "That was all." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes that is enough. Sometimes that is everything." But the story was not over. Because, as the last child was helped into the ambulance, one of the investigators emerged from the van carrying a clear evidence bag. Inside it was a phone. A simple, cheap, prepaid phone. And it had been ringing. Not now, it had rung exactly once, just before the doors were opened. No one had answered it. They needed to know who had called, and within 2 hours they would find out. The number traced back to a burner. That was the first thing the investigators confirmed. A prepaid device, purchased with cash, no registered owner. The kind of phone that exists specifically to leave no trail. The kind of phone that belongs to a world most people only see in films, except this was real. And the trail, however faint, was there. Every phone leaves traces, even the ones that are bought to leave none. Cell tower data, purchase records from a small electronics shop in East London, CCTV footage, grainy, time-stamped, unhelpful on its own but useful when pieced together with everything else. The investigators were patient. They had been doing this long before Maya had ever walked past that van. They knew how to follow the faint thread through the dark. Maya didn't know any of this yet. She was sitting in a small room at the nearest police station, a cup of tea going cold in front of her, giving her statement to a detective who wrote everything down by hand, old-fashioned, methodical. He asked her the same things, several times in slightly different ways, and she understood, even without being told, that this was deliberate, that the repetition was meant to catch inconsistencies, to build a fuller picture, to make sure nothing was missed. She told him everything: the 6 a.m. delivery, the van she had noticed then and again at 9, the covered windows, the feeling, the click, he repeated, writing it down. You're certain about that? Yes, you said it sounded like an engine starting, not starting, like something activating, like something waking up. He looked at her for a moment over the top of his notepad. That's a very precise distinction, he said. Is it important? He didn't answer directly. He wrote something down. Then he asked her the next question. She would find out later, weeks later, when more of the investigation became public, that the click had been exactly what her instincts told her it was. A timer device, not a bomb, something else. A remote locking mechanism on the van's ventilation system designed to activate at a specific time. The investigators believed the phone call, the one that had rung once and gone unanswered, had been meant to trigger the next phase of whatever the plan had been. What that plan was, exactly, took longer to unravel. The children were from 3 different families. 2 sisters, a boy who lived 4 streets from one of them, a girl who had no known connection to the others, who had, by every account, been in the wrong place at the wrong time in the worst possible way. They had been taken from different locations across London over a 72-hour window before that Tuesday morning. The disappearances had been reported. The police had been searching. The families had been living inside a nightmare. And then the call came. Not to the police, not to the investigators, to the families themselves, to the parents who had spent 3 days not sleeping, not eating properly, sitting by their phones and staring at doors that didn't open. An officer arrived in person for each family. Maya would read about this later, in the fragments of reporting that filtered through. She would read about the moment each family was told their child had been found, alive, safe. She would read the quotes, careful, guarded quotes from people who were still processing something their hearts could not yet fully hold. One father, whose 7-year-old son had been one of the 4, said something that stayed with Maya for a very long time. He said, "Someone paid attention when they didn't have to. That's the only reason I got to hug my boy today." She read that line 3 times. She was sitting at her kitchen table by then, still in her coat, still in the clothes she had worn that morning. It was nearly midnight. She had been awake for almost 20 hours. Her phone had rung constantly. Her boss, her mother, a journalist she didn't speak to, 2 friends who had seen something on the news and put it together. She hadn't answered most of them. She sat with the quiet and the cold tea and the weight of the day slowly settling over her like something physical, like a blanket made of all the things that could have been different, because it could have been so different if she had been 5 minutes earlier that morning, if she had been running later and too distracted to look, if the feeling in her stomach had been easier to dismiss, if she had told herself, as she almost had, that it was none of her business. It almost wasn't. That was the hardest part to sit with, not what had happened, but how close it had come to not happening at all. Outside her window, London hummed its ordinary nighttime hum. Buses, distant sirens, somewhere, a dog barking at something in the dark. She finally took her coat off, and in a hospital across the city, 4 children slept in clean beds with their families close, while investigators worked through the night on a case that had only just begun to open up. The person who had made that phone call was still out there, and they didn't yet know that the plan had failed. 3 weeks later, 2 men were arrested. The news broke on a Thursday morning, the kind of grey, unremarkable morning that has no idea what kind of news it's carrying. Investigators had followed the thread. The phone, cell towers, the shop in East London, the CCTV footage, the financial records, the digital footprints that people always believe they haven't left. They had been patient and methodical and relentless, the way the best investigators always are to men. One with a prior record, one without, both now facing charges that the reporters described in careful legal language that didn't quite capture the reality of what they had done, what they had intended to do. 2 for children on a cold Tuesday morning near a palace gate. Maya read the news standing in her shop. A Tuesday again, as it happened. White roses on the table in front of her, her hands still for the first time in what felt like hours. She had not spoken publicly about what happened. She had not given interviews or accepted the meeting request from the journalist who had tracked down her shop and left a card with a very polite handwritten note on the back. She had gone back to work the day after it happened, and the day after that, and every day since. She had arranged flowers for a christening and two funerals and a corporate event, and a woman who walked in off the street and said she just wanted something that smelled like spring. She had been living her ordinary life inside an ordinary that had quietly and permanently shifted. Officer Daniel Marsh had sent her a message through official channels, brief, formal in the way that people are when they feel strongly about something and aren't sure how much they're allowed to show it. He thanked her for what she did. He said, and she read this part several times, that in 11 years of service, he had learned that the people who change outcomes are almost never the ones who set out to be heroes. They are almost always the ones who are simply paying attention. She had saved that message. One of the families reached out, the father of the 7-year-old boy, the one whose quote she had read at midnight at her kitchen table. He had asked through the family liaison officer whether Maya would be willing to meet. She said yes. The meeting was short. A cafe, a corner table. He was a quiet man, quieter than she had imagined from the force of his words in print. He brought his son. The boy was curious and a little shy and spent most of the meeting looking at Maya with the wide, uncomplicated attention that children bring to things they find interesting. At the end of it, the man reached across the table and shook her hand. He held it for a moment longer than a normal handshake. He didn't say very much. He didn't need to. The boy on the way out turned back to look at her. "Mum says you were the one who found us," he said. Maya wasn't sure how to answer that. She hadn't found them. Exactly. She had just noticed something. She had just trusted a feeling. She had just walked up to a guard on a cold morning and said a sentence that felt ridiculous even as she said it. "I just told someone," she said. The boy considered this seriously. The way 7-year-olds consider things they're still deciding how to categorize. "That's still something," he said, and then he followed his father out of the cafe. And Maya sat with her coffee in that sentence, and she thought, not for the first time and not for the last, about how close it had all come to silence, about how much depends on the smallest decisions, the choice to slow down instead of rush, the choice to speak instead of stay quiet, the choice to trust what you feel, even when every sensible voice in your head tells you not to make a scene, not to be dramatic, not to be the person who causes a fuss over a parked van on an ordinary street. She thought about all the people who had walked past that morning without stopping. She was not better than them. She was not braver than them. She was not more capable or more observant or more heroic. She had simply chosen, in one unplanned moment, to listen to herself. That was all. That was everything. And across the city, in a house that had been quiet for 3 terrible days and was now full of noise again. The best kind of noise. The noise of a child living. A boy kicked a football against a garden wall and didn't think about vans or cold mornings or the woman in the green coat who had looked twice when she could have looked once and kept walking. He didn't think about any of it. He just played. Because someone had paid attention. And that is always, always enough.
If this story moved you, if it reminded you that ordinary people do extraordinary things every single day, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have not subscribed yet, now it is the time. Hit the button and join a community that believe in the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do it simply pay attention. If you are new here, subscribe. Every week we bring you true story like this one. Story of courage, humanity, and the moment that quietly change everything. We will see you in the next one.